The pounding came first, fists on metal rattling the chain-link gate like a drumbeat of hostility. My cameras had been rolling since dawn, catching footage of herons combing the waterline and red-winged blackbirds flashing their scarlet signals through the reeds. I had been in that careful, meditative groove of filming when the shouting started. Out of compliance. Unauthorized surveillance. The voices cracked like poorly rehearsed actors. Lines delivered with more volume than conviction. For a split second, I thought I'd wandered into some bizarre street performance. But the gut clench following that thought reminded me this wasn't theater. This was real, and these men weren't bluffing. 3 of them stood on the other side of the gate, chest puffed out under black tactical-style vests. The heavy-set one in front, clearly their ringleader, barked the orders. He introduced himself with manufactured authority. Mike Thompson, HOA Enforcement Division. Behind him, 2 others fiddled with walkie-talkies, pressing buttons and muttering to each other in broken, rehearsed tones, as though trying desperately to sell the illusion of coordination. Their badges, if you wanted to call them that, swung on lanyards, laminated printouts that might as well have come from a middle school art project. It would have been funny if it hadn't been terrifying. On the other side of that flimsy fence sat 3 years of my life's work. Cameras, stabilization rigs, telephoto lenses, nearly $20,000 in equipment. Every dollar I hadn't spent on food or utilities had gone into that gear. That gear was my career, and these men, strangers with cinema security cosplay, leered at it like wolves at an open rabbit pen. If they made a move to seize or smash the equipment, I'd be ruined in minutes. I forced the panic down and spoke through the fence. This is private property. You have no jurisdiction here. My voice was firm, though my pulse betrayed the fear thumping under my skin. Mike Thompson sneered, waving papers through the air like Holy Writ. Venue Development Standards. Unauthorized commercial activity. HOA jurisdiction applies. The words spilled out heavy with confidence, yet empty of meaning. Venue development? I almost laughed right then, but I held it back. What on earth does developing community venues have to do with me filming sandpipers and nesting cranes? I asked for proper credentials, real ones, not the inkjet badges glinting in the sunlight. That's when they faltered. The papers in their hands bore all the legitimacy of high school homework. Generic HOA letters with scribbled notes in margins, hastily inserted clauses that screamed improvisation. Even the 2 behind Mike exchanged quick, nervous glances as my questions cut deeper. I pressed harder. Which HOA exactly did they claim to represent? What was their legal tie to my land? Mike's bluster sputtered thin. The longer I held the line, the more obvious it became. They weren't here as enforcers of law, but as characters in some cheap intimidation act, sent by somebody pulling strings off stage. I held up my state permit through the gate bars like a shield. Department of Natural Resources. State authorization for educational filming. This makes my presence here lawful. My voice gained edge, backed by law and proof. The words landed hard. Mike leaned forward, trying to scan the document. His confidence leaked. His companions visibly deflated. What had begun as swagger collapsed into confusion. This camera is surveillance equipment, he snapped, pointing at my longest zoom lens as though he'd just discovered a missile launcher. The absurdity cracked me, and laughter burst out uncontained. If that's a spy device, then my television is military hardware. The sound of my laugh mixed with the metallic buzzing of the gate, deflating what little menace they carried. The men looked momentarily stunned, not expecting ridicule in place of fear. My laughter wasn't just levity, it was release. A way to puncture the balloon of fear swelling inside me. Because deep down I understood. Their act only worked if I bought the tickets. But the fear still had teeth. Because somewhere behind their bluster was a name repeated like a quiet drumbeat. Donna Henderson. She was the one who sent them. The president, the mastermind, cloaking private ambitions with a veil of HOA authority. Donna hadn't knocked, hadn't written, hadn't asked. She'd sent goons. That alone told me volumes about her playbook. Mike leaned closer, his face pressing near the fence, voice low and sharp. You can cooperate now or this escalates. Mrs. Henderson doesn't tolerate delay. His mask slipped, trading faux professionalism for outright menace. His buddies stepped in, shifting their stances, abandoning the bureaucratic charade and slipping into physical intimidation. My fingers tightened on the phone in my pocket. I smiled instead of flinching, because the patrol dispatch had already been pinged. While their fake radios buzzed with static, real ones were crackling alive miles away. I bolted the gate shut, the clang of chain and lock louder than their fists. And then I did the only thing left to do. I lifted the phone, started recording, and laughed again. Smile for the cameras, boys. Let's see how real law enforcement likes your performance. That iron laughter cycled between nerves and resolve. In seconds, my quiet sanctuary had turned hostile. But the truth was simple. They couldn't touch my cameras, my lake, or my rights. Not with phony badges, not with scribbled papers, and not with fists on a metal gate. The phone rang before the dust from the gate showdown had even settled. Its shrill vibration against the workbench made me flinch, as if the sound carried the same intrusion as fists on steel. I knew who it was before I even glanced at the caller ID. Donna Henderson. The simple text of her name on the screen looked like a brand seared into glass. Bright. False authority masquerading as community leadership. I debated letting it buzz unanswered, but her persistence had gravity. 4 calls in under 5 minutes. Ignoring her would only force whatever scheme she was running to shift into another, probably uglier form. So I answered. Her voice oozed through the line like syrup poured over glass, sweet with fake charm, sticky with manipulation, and impossible to mistake for anything genuine. "Lucas," she cooed, as if this weren't the 20th time she'd harassed me in as many weeks. "I'm so glad we could finally connect. I just wanted to talk this through, neighbor to neighbor." Neighbor to neighbor? I nearly barked a laugh. Real neighbors knock on doors. They don't send weekend mercenaries in thrift store tactical vests. While she spoke, I faintly heard the tap of a keyboard, paper shuffling somewhere near her microphone. This wasn't an impromptu call. This was a timed strike. Sure enough, within seconds my inbox pinged with a polished brochure. The PDF bloomed across my laptop screen and my stomach dropped. There it was, my sanctuary, my carefully protected filming spot, my blind hidden in the reeds, my dock with weathered boards, even the angle of light bouncing off the lake's still surface at dawn. Except in her version, the sanctuary was unrecognizable. She'd dressed it up with digital confetti, floral archways on the waterfront, rows of silk-draped chairs, strings of glowing lanterns swaying across the bank. A tagline stretched bold over the water. Pleasant lake weddings, the ultimate destination. My chest felt hollow. Years of patient study, waking at miserable hours to catch first light migrations, all reduced to a stock photo backdrop for bridal Instagram posts. My refuge, sold without my knowledge, turned into someone else's fantasy profit margin. "That's a hell of a trick," I said softly into the receiver, my eyes still captive to the false scene on my screen. "Stealing someone else's habitat to build your brochure portfolio." Donna's syrupy tone didn't falter. If anything, it brightened like she was pleased I understood. "This isn't stealing, Lucas, this is development. Your cameras and little birdwatching project are temporary. We're building for the future. Community assets. Community revenue. Translation. Profits for Donna Henderson. Papered over with the language of neighborhood spirit." She continued her pitch with astonishing speed, weaving in legal terms like tinsel tangled with barbed wire. "Venue development standards, emergency improvement phases, governance authority." She rattled off phrases as though speaking incantations, and I could almost hear the echo of lawyers she once skimmed notes from. But the cracks were obvious. The bylaws she cited didn't exist. The words sounded official until you examined them, then they crumbled into gibberish. "You realize state permits supersede any of this, right?" I cut in. "I'm authorized by the Department of Natural Resources. Your HOA can't wave this away with made-up venue rules." A pause, and in that silence her genial mask slipped for the first time. Then lower, sharper. "You don't want to be the last one holding out, Lucas. 18 signatures already. Do you really want to be left behind when the road becomes public?" So that was it. Not just intimidation, extortion. A threat wrapped in bureaucratic parchment. "Sign your name, pay the fee, surrender your sanctuary, or stay isolated, strangled by legal harassment until you break." She overplayed, though. That public road fantasy gave her away. The HOA never voted on any of this. Roads don't become public because a handful of signatures change their minds. She had no jurisdiction, only audacity. I called it out. Her response? She chuckled, low and derisive. "Lucas, your hobby doesn't generate community value. Brides do, families do. You need to decide whether you're a good neighbor or just an obstacle. The seeth in me was volcanic. A hobby? She had just dismissed 3 years of nocturnal vigils, endless hours of footage contracted to streaming platforms and environmental institutions as a trivial pastime, because it wouldn't net her a 5-figure booking fee. My hands clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. Peaceful habitats don't need archways, I snapped. And cameras pointed at cranes don't need your permission. This isn't your land and it's not your venue, Donna. This is theft, plain and simple. Another pause, longer this time. Her honeyed tone returned thinner now, like a strained violin string. Oh, Lucas, she sighed. That's not how everyone else sees it. Deposits are being collected. Flyers are already printed. Couples are counting on us. She actually had the gall to include me in her scheme rhetorically, as if my silence had somehow equaled consent. The PDF glowed brighter on my laptop, mocking me with floral arches and happy couples strolling across a dock that wasn't hers to sell. Somewhere within that polished deceit were deposits stolen from real people, just like my sanctuary had been stolen in pixels. When the call ended, I sat still for a long moment, staring at the wedding mock-up lake as though by sheer will I could scrub away the false decorations and see my herons again. Donna had revealed her hand. The intimidation at my gate was just phase 1. This was bigger, coordinated, and funded. She wasn't improvising like Mike Thompson and his lanyards. She had a business plan, and step 1 was writing me out of my own story. But if Donna Henderson thrived on one thing, it was people not asking questions. People not reading the fine print. People shrugging and assuming she had authority she didn't. That morning, as I filed digital copies of the brochure into my growing collection of evidence, I swore to myself that I would not be another sighing neighbor caught in her web. My sanctuary wasn't for sale. Not to her, not to anyone. The first sign came disguised as an ordinary text from a neighbor. Just a link, no context, lucasrobinson.org. The name alone made my pulse quicken, because I would never register a site under my own name. Caution stiffened me as I tapped. What loaded punched me harder than fists on a gate ever had. Front page headline, Concerned Citizens Raise Alarm Over Neighborhood Spying. Below it, a collage of images, my cameras, my tripods, my motion sensors, snatched out of context, digitally warped into menacing things they weren't. Captions dripped poison. Infrared surveillance pointed toward family homes. Unregistered devices monitoring children at play. It turned my meticulous conservation setup into something sordid. 3 years of work documenting herons, swans, and seasonal migrations repackaged as voyeurism for dramatic effect. My wildlife cameras had suddenly been weaponized into accusations of predation. My morning coffee turned bitter in my stomach. Someone, no, Donna, had taken the time to stage this attack with professional design polish. It wasn't some crude Facebook rant. It was tailored to look trustworthy. Branded layout, fake testimonials from anonymous residents, manipulated timestamps meant to suggest illicit midnight monitoring. The precision of the smear revealed a chilling truth. She had been preparing this for weeks, maybe months, anticipating my resistance. Passage by passage, the article twisted reality. My telephoto lens wasn't a tool for capturing the trembling flight of sandpipers. It was military-style long-distance surveillance. My night vision trail cameras weren't for owls. They were infrared intrusion. Devices monitoring neighbor behavior. She hadn't lied outright. Instead, she distorted each piece of gear by simply relabeling its purpose. Accuracy poisoned by insinuation. Within the hour, calls started. The Wildlife Foundation left a voicemail in a cautious, disappointed tone. They'd read community reports about inappropriate equipment use. They wanted assurances that my state permit hadn't been violated. The contract manager from my streaming network emailed, asking for clarification after troubling mentions surfaced online. I scrolled with sinking dread. Donna had gone after not just my reputation, but my lifeline, my endorsements, my contracts. Without them, 3 years of footage wouldn't matter. My career could wither overnight. I dove into the smear site, peeling it apart like an autopsy. Metadata didn't line up. Timestamps clashed with physical reality, suggesting doctored files. Image compression told its own story. Smartphone photos edited to mimic DSLR capture. They'd borrowed elements of my setup but restitched them with fabricated context to sell the lie. It only confirmed what I suspected. Someone had been sneaking onto my property at night, photographing my stations, then dressing the evidence in suspicion, and then the byline. Anonymous concerned neighbor. The writing style, however, was unmistakable. Donna's fingerprints were all over it. Her trademark dramatics. Her inflated sense of self-importance disguised as legal commentary. The prose practically dripped with her cadence. She'd wrapped her smear in anonymity. But the author was invisible only to those who hadn't heard her voice at a community meeting. The rage rising in me trembled into action. I documented every shred, screenshots of manipulated photos, archived versions of the pages, server registration details tying the domain to a board member's LLC. The ownership trail wasn't subtle. She hadn't just slandered me. She'd paid for it, registered it, built a digital weapon against me. Organized sabotage masquerading as grassroots concern. But amid the bile was a lifeline. Mrs. Patterson, the quiet, silver-haired widow whose property bordered mine, knocked gently that afternoon. She'd followed my work for years, watching birds through her kitchen window while sipping her morning tea. "I've seen what you do out here, Lucas," she told me firmly. Her eyes glinted with the sharpness of someone tired of lies. "Birds and water. Nothing else. Anyone saying otherwise is blind or dishonest." Her voice of calm cut through the storm. Not just moral encouragement, but crucial testimony. If defamation thrives on absence of truth, she embodied its antidote. Her words fortified me as I tore through HOA public records, combing over bylaws, meeting minutes, voting logs. And the obvious surfaced quickly. None of this smear had any legitimate HOA authorization. There were no meetings, no votes, no resolutions passed about camera bans or surveillance fees. Donna had conjured her authority from fog and called it law. The glory of bylaws, however tedious, revealed the weakness of her scheme. Her entire framework was unsupported. Pure fiction in legal dress. By nightfall, I had evidence folders arranged like sandbags against a flood, metadata analyses, forged screenshot breakdowns, the LLC registration for her smear site, an affidavit draft from Mrs. Patterson. But anger still churned beneath the neatness. Donna hadn't just trespassed my property or my peace. She trespassed my identity, my name, my work. My reputation had been dragged across screens and whispered about in PTA meetings. She wanted my career scorched, yet the irony was almost poetic. In her rush to assassinate my image, she overextended. Left trails, contradictions, domain records. Fraud always does, eventually. I knew then this wasn't the final battle, but a widening war. When I replayed footage of that day's herons landing in the reeds, their patient grace against afternoon light, the contrast nearly broke me. They survived on simplicity, clarity, instinct. Meanwhile, Donna built castles of lies atop other people's shores. Her story might stir fear for a while, but truth doesn't erode like that. My neighbor's testimony, my contracts, my evidence, all of it whispered the same reminder. Reality beats fabrication, but not without a fight. And Donna Henderson had just turned our fight into open war. The notice for the emergency community meeting slipped into my mailbox like a summons. No date planned weeks in advance, no courtesy reminders, just a last-minute 12-hour warning printed in bold red ink. Privacy crisis, HOA meeting mandatory attendance. It was classic Donna. Drag people out on short notice, flood them with dramatic slideshows, and leave no room for preparation or dissent. I almost didn't go, but the word mandatory burned. If I didn't show, she'd spin it as proof of guilt. If I did, at least my footage and truth could speak for itself. The community center pulsed with tension when I walked in. Folding chairs lined in neat metallic rows divided the room into halves. Those leaning forward, eager to believe Donna's warnings, and those leaning back, cautiously skeptical. On the projector screen, massive red letters screamed, "Spying crisis, surveillance threat." Donna herself stood like an actress in the spotlight, remote in one hand, a polished stack of slides behind her. Each one featured thumbnails of my cameras, crudely labeled with phrases like infrared invasion and unauthorized surveillance. Her voice carried the polish of rehearsed alarm. "Your children," she intoned. "Your privacy. Our safety as a community." Each word was meant to tip the emotional scale into panic. For a moment, some neighbors nodded uneasily, stealing glances at me like I might sprout antennae. I clenched my jaw, waiting for my moment. When it came, the contrast was indescribable. Donna's propaganda dimmed from the screen and my laptop flickered to life. I let the footage roll without narration. 20 minutes of raw, breathtaking migration documentation. Sandhill cranes gliding across the horizon at dawn. Owls pivoting soundlessly through moonlight. Herons landing at the lake's edge, their wings stretched like cathedral arches. The room, once filled with rustling and murmurs, went still. The silence felt different than hers. This was awe, not fear. I turned to explain with deliberate calm. The permits, the contracts, the scientific purpose. Conservation work doesn't pry into human windows. It opens windows into natural worlds. My voice wasn't booming, but I knew the footage had already carried more weight than Donna's dramatics ever could. Mrs. Patterson's eyes glistened in the second row as a great blue heron she'd watched from her kitchen appeared larger than life on the screen. Even longtime skeptics leaned forward as birds they'd never noticed before filled the room with color and sound. Then Tom Wilson stood, one of Donna's more loyal allies up until that night. His face was pale, voice steady but breaking. "Nobody voted on any of this," he said quietly, shaking his head. "Not the fees, not the venue plans, not the surveillance accusations." He stepped out from Donna's side and sat among the residents, now nodding toward me. It was a small shift physically, but enormous symbolically. Donna's credibility cracked audibly in that moment. Her mask slipped. She pivoted desperately from privacy violations to talking about economic opportunities. Her tone sharpened. "Community lake weddings. Seasonal festivals. We need progress, not hobbies." The word hobby dug claws into me, dismissive, contemptuous. The audience's faces shifted too. They caught the slip. What she had framed as a fight for safety was now exposed for what it had always been. A profit scheme draped in false governance. A retired attorney in the third row slammed the coffin shut. Distinguished gray hair, measured words. "Donna," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of courtroom experience. "Show us the minutes. Meeting votes authorizing these fees. Proof of any legitimate authority." His questions landed with surgical precision. Donna had nothing. She rattled papers, deflected, changed subjects, but no documentation appeared. Her silence was louder than any accusation I could have made, and she knew it. You could see it in the stiffness of her shoulders, the frantic glances back at her projector, the desperation creeping into her explanations. Her empire of dramatic slides and made-up bylaws was collapsing under the simplest scrutiny. But humiliation has a way of birthing revenge. That night, as I reviewed my own footage and tried to process the strange blend of relief and exhaustion, my motion sensors pinged. The infrared alarms flared in sequence, sensors tripped like dominoes. This was no fox or deer. The movements were coordinated, deliberate, human. Through grainy night vision, I watched silhouettes breach my sanctuary. 3 figures creeping low, carrying blunt tools. My heart thumped against my ribs as the first camera toppled, smashed under a boot. Then another shoved into the mud. One saboteur wrestled with the stabilization rig, wrenching it until it snapped. Each strike reverberated like blows to my chest. Years of work, thousands of dollars undone in seconds. But what they didn't know, what Donna herself didn't calculate, was that redundancy is a filmmaker's best friend. Waterproof housings, multiple angles, audio mics tucked where eyes don't glance. As tools cracked and lenses shattered, the true footage recorded everything. The saboteurs' faces caught in the pale light, their license plates glinting as they parked, and worst of all, Donna's unmistakable voice cutting across the night like a director calling cues. "Clear the site permanently. Tomorrow this becomes the venue." Her voice on tape. My sanctuary drowned in destruction, but her empire drowned in evidence. The footage was both agony and triumph. Watching $20,000 worth of sensitive equipment snapped like sticks made bile rise in my throat. Seeing years of nocturnal owls, migrations, fish patterns potentially gone, made me tremble in fury. But I also saw the endgame. Every face, every plate, every word captured cleanly, indisputably. She hadn't just sabotaged me, she'd indicted herself. When police arrived, blue lights cutting through wet reeds, the irony was poetic. 2 saboteurs bolted into the night like startled raccoons. The heavy-set one, Mike Thompson, Donna's thug in tactical cosplay, slipped in mud, his crash into waist-deep water echoing across the lake like karma's drumbeat. Officers yanked him sputtering from the muck, dragging his dripping vest into headlights. A neighbor filmed the scene, the video ricocheting across group chats before midnight. By morning, the story wasn't surveillance paranoia anymore. It was sabotage, fraud, and destruction on camera. And Donna's voice, her own words, sentencing her before courts even entered the picture. Morning light streamed through the county courthouse windows, sharp and clear, as though nature itself wanted no ambiguity on this day. Months of harassment had built to this moment. I walked in with my lawyer, carrying hard drives full of footage, folders of printed evidence, and the weight of 3 years of conservation work nearly destroyed. Behind me, Na's hand rested steady on my arm, an anchor reminding me this wasn't just about contracts and cameras. This was about dignity, about truth. The courtroom filled with an unusual mix, neighbors clutching refund slips, conservation officers in sharp uniforms, county clerks who had red-stamped Donna's fraudulent petitions, and media reporters with cameras waiting for the spectacle. At the defense table sat Donna Henderson, once the self-styled queen of the HOA, now stripped of charisma, flanked by an attorney who looked more like a hostage than a representative. She still clung to folders labeled development plans, as if a few printed brochures could outweigh federal indictments. The prosecutors moved like a tide. First, the county assessor spread the property records across a glowing projection screen. Decades of titles proving my sanctuary had always been private, untouched by HOA jurisdiction. No covenants, no shared easements, no loopholes. This lake, he said firmly, was never Donna Henderson's to sell, to rent, or to regulate. Donna shifted, her attorney scribbling frantic notes. Then came environmental services. Sarah Walsh stepped forward with jars containing traces of fluorescent dye, photographs of belly-up bluegills, and permits showing how Donna's reckless, cheap alternative discharge had constituted a federal violation. The room gasped audibly at the neon lake photos splashed onto the courtroom screen. This wasn't beautification, Sarah stated. This was contamination. Next came the insurance investigator, building the case that Donna had submitted falsified ownership documents to claim damage reimbursements for property that wasn't hers. Organized fraud, he called it bluntly. Attempts to defraud insurers, municipalities, residents, and federal agencies. But the final blow didn't come from the officials. It came from my cameras. My salvaged night vision footage projected to the jury filled the chamber with eerie green-hued clarity. Saboteurs creeping through reeds, boots crushing equipment, hands pulling cables, and above it all, Donna's voice, crisp and undeniable. Clear the site. Tomorrow this becomes our venue. The silence after her command played was deafening. No lawyer could spin it, no denial could mask it. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It wasn't my word against hers. It was her voice, her instructions, her crime, preserved in my conservation archive. Nature's eye had become justice's witness. By the time the prosecution rested, Donna's mask of composure had cracked into desperation. She claimed she'd acted under emergency community development powers. She claimed her actions protected property values. She claimed victimhood, called me an obstructionist, even muttered about conspiracies against her. But each outburst dug her deeper. There were no bylaws granting emergency powers, no votes for public roads, no authorization for fake weddings. Every claim contradicted by documents, witnesses, and her own digital trail. The verdict delivered what everyone in that courtroom already knew. Guilty on fraud, forgery, environmental damage, insurance misrepresentation, impersonation of authority, and racketeering. The federal charges carried the heaviest weight. Organized interstate fraud, the kind reserved for enterprises that exploit communities across state lines. The judge's voice echoed with finality. 4 years in federal prison, triple restitution for destroyed equipment and lost contracts, permanent ban from HOA boards, repayment of every stolen wedding deposit, and thousands in fines for environmental remediation. Donna's shoulders sagged as the gavel struck. The paper empire she built on signatures, lies, and intimidation collapsed into dust. But the aftermath was more than punishment. It was restoration. The restitution payments covered not only my destroyed camera rigs but made room for upgrades, new night vision systems, better stabilization, stronger housings. Out of ashes sprouted better tools for my work, proof that even sabotage can transform into growth when law stands tall. My contracts with conservation groups were reaffirmed. The streaming platform extending my deal after footage of the herons contrasted so starkly with clips of criminal sabotage. Irony lingered. The attempted smear to ruin me had instead broadcast my legitimacy to a wider audience. Neighbors changed too. Meetings, once theater stages for Donna's dramatics, now became sober gatherings about governance reform. Tom Wilson, once her ally, headed a new committee for transparency. Neighbors who once eyed me with suspicion now offered apologies, some awkward, others heartfelt. "She fooled us all," one said, gripping my hand. But I shook my head. She fooled herself. You just wanted someone to trust. The Davis couple, once defrauded of wedding deposits, stopped by to thank me for blowing open the scheme before others were duped. Mrs. Patterson smiled, telling me quietly she always knew patience and truth would land stronger than any smear. One evening, sitting alone on the dock, I watched as an egret glided down in flawless silence to skim the surface of the lake. It was the same lake Donna had tried to sell out. The same lake saboteurs had poisoned with dye and polluted with neon lights. The same lake smeared across websites as surveillance property. And yet here it was, calm, unchanged, unshaken. The birds returned as if to remind me. Nature forgives faster than people and always more honestly. Justice hadn't returned what I lost in time or effort, but it had proven something stronger. That truth, filmed frame by frame in patience, still outweighs the loudest lies. As I packed down my tripod for the evening, I thought of Donna's final outburst before sentencing, her insistence she was just improving the community. I almost laughed, because if improving meant bulldozing, lying, and poisoning, then her prison bars would be the best neighborhood improvement of all. I raised my lens toward the sunset, catching the streak of a heron just as its wings spread against the orange sky. The light poured gold across the lake, undisturbed, mine again in every sense that mattered. The battle was finally over, and the truth, caught on camera, etched in records, locked forever into the legal system, had landed as gracefully as the heron on my lake.